砖国家构建的金融安全网的当家人，他对于世界经济走向有着清晰的判断。他认为，开发的美妙之处就在于让世界各国的人们生活变得更好。2022年金砖中国年，新开发银行行长在巴西接受高端访谈独家专访，敬请收看。
大家好，欢迎来到本期的高端访谈，我是邹韵。今天呢，我们要带您走进一家全球多边金融机构。它是历史上第一个由全球主要新兴经济体发起并且主导的国际多边开发机构。它被认为是全球金融治理的新典范，而他家自己明确描述为世界多边和区域金融机构的重要补充。它就是金砖国家新开发银行。在当今世界经济步履维艰的情况之下，它是如何应运而生的？而多边金融机构林立的背景之下，它又是如何不断突破的？世界百年变局和世纪疫情相互叠加，全球发展遭遇严重挑战的语境之下，它又有着怎样的发展愿景呢？2022年是金砖中国年，我们将在今天的节目当中发出一连串的金砖之问，对话新开发银行行长特罗约。特罗约职业经历丰富，在担任巴西经济部副部长期间，他推动南方共同市场与欧盟缔结了经济体之间迄今为止最大的自贸协定。他还曾创办哥伦比亚大学金砖国家研究中心，出版了一系列有关全球化、竞争力的专著。自从他于2020年5月就任金砖国家新开发银行行长后，就备受外界的期待。President Choi Ho, thank you so much for joining us here at China Media Group.
It is my pleasure to join your show. Thank you.
Well, 2022 is a very special year for the New Development Bank, or NDB, because it marks the 10th anniversary of the decision to establish the bank and the 7th anniversary of its official launch. And you once said that the bank is still like a 7-year-old child, but from what we see, this child has already delivered some really outstanding achievements. For instance, it has expanded from the initial 5 member states to 9 ones now, approved more than 80 projects of nearly $32 billion. So for you, as the president of the bank, what has been the bank's biggest achievements?
Well, it's true. It's really remarkable to think that only about a decade ago, the New Development Bank only existed as a dream. Emerging economies for a long time have tried to have a bigger voice in multilateral affairs in the traditional institutions established in the 1940s. So it was a long-standing dream to have a new development institution that could point towards the future. And then the BRICS came together and established the NDB, which I think is another very important symbol of what emerging economies can achieve when they work together. And we've been quite successful so far, thanks to, once again, the support of our leaders, the support of our member countries, and we are living up to the very name of the institution.
2008年爆发的金融危机是自第2次世界大战以来将全球经济拖入全面衰退最严重的一次金融危机，它引发了全球战力。如何构筑一个共同的金融安全网，成了这些国家思考的问题。2012年3月，金砖国家领导人第4次会晤在印度新德里举行。与会领导人深入探讨了建立一个新的开发银行的可能性。2年后，在金砖国家领导人第6次会晤期间，中国、巴西、俄罗斯、印度和南非5国领导人签署了成立新开发银行的协议。这个由发展中国家主导建立的多边开发银行具有历史意义，因为自2战以来，从来都没有一个多边银行是由发展中国家主导建立的。它贯彻的平等理念是金砖国家对建立国际金融新秩序展开的尝试。
Well, the name of the bank, New Development Bank, it has a word new in it. And, this concept of new has also been carried out throughout the design, the management, also the governance of the bank. Well, here, first of all, I want to invite you to watch a video together with us. It's a promo video that is posted on the official website of the bank. about what makes it so different. In this video, we did the math that the word new was mentioned about 15 times. Well, Mr. Triho, I know you used to have great passion for studying the origin of words. So help us understand here that why the word new is particularly important to the bank, and how can you make sure that this is not only just talk the talk, but also walking the talk?
Yeah, I think our challenge, is to make the new development bank new every day, and I think in different dimensions. New in terms of our relationship with our member countries. We have moved away from the traditional prescriptions of those institutions that were established long ago. Of course, we are part of a multilateral community where we are musicians in an orchestra that tries to play the beautiful song of the promotion
That's really good metaphor.
of development. We are new in the sense that we are perhaps the first institution that is fully governed by emerging economies. We are new also because there is a kind of metamorphosis, Yuan, in the sense of infrastructure. Since our mandate is infrastructure, we're not only talking about the physical, the tangible aspects of infrastructure. So for example, if you're thinking about the infrastructure in education, it's not only about the school building, but having that building connected to allow for classes that are taught remotely. And also new in terms of building new governance. If we can put together the biggest, the most important emerging economies of the world so as to define what new development will mean for the future, I think this is a very key contribution to promoting global prosperity and, of course, further cooperation in a global juncture where this is so badly needed.
新开发银行在治理结构方面精简高效，它不仅新，还又快又准。新冠疫情爆发后，银行在2020年4月就迅速设立了抗疫紧急援助贷款机制，通过快速通道，先后批准了总额达90亿美元的紧急贷款，用于支持各成员国抗击疫情、恢复经济。例如，支持南非经济恢复的紧急贷款，2021年6月签约放款，短短半年间，贷款支持的总统就业计划就创造了约70万个就业机会。
This is really, really impressive. So how can the NDB respond, first of all, so efficiently, and also at the same time to act in such a very targeted manner?
Well, when our founders decided to set up the bank, one of the key characteristics that they wanted the NDB to feature was the issue of agility, to be able to respond in a very fast and efficient manner to challenges that would be arising. And the challenges have been really tremendous. I mean, think about the emergence of COVID-19 and, of course, the economic problems that come along with it. We run a very tight crew here. We are able, through efficiency and interacting very closely with our member countries, to respond with great agility. And I think our COVID response projects are a very good example of that.
Well, there's another reason that why the year 2022 is very special, because now the bank is transitioning from its first 5-year general strategy to the second one. In this new plan, about 40% of the investment will be made on climate change related projects. So why the bank decides to make its biggest investment on such front? And also, what are some of the other highlights of this new plan?
Yeah, I mean, the first cycle of 5 years was, of course, very focused on getting the institution off the ground, moving it from a startup phase to being a full-fledged multilateral development institution. Now, over this next 5 years and the strategy that covers it, Yuan, there is a great stress, there is a great emphasis on development quality, on development impact. So yes, there are focus areas, as you have indicated. For example, climate change is one of the biggest challenges for our planet, and I'll make sure that NDB advances its contributions to addressing it. And of course, we also, as I mentioned to you earlier on, a part of a multilateral family. So we want to have bigger and bigger associations with other development institutions so as to crowd in the resources that are there to establish the bridge between the needs and the potential of our member countries.
At the same time, we're wondering, Mr. Choi-ho, that do you personally have any projects that you felt that really impressive or very concerned?
Yeah, I think the beautiful thing about development, Yuan, is that you change people's lives for the better. For example, Brazil has received investments from the new development bank so as to allow for the bigger solar energy plant in Latin America. India has received investments from the new development bank to allow for faster connections on railways so that a couple who is coming back home from work can spend more time with their children. In China, you have major utilization of the power of wind to make cleaner energy. And one of the beauties about it is that these examples stand out and they can be used for other developing nations as well. So sometimes a solution that works in China or in India or in Brazil can actually inspire other development projects across the development world. And I think, you see, this is going to be more and more the case because one of the chief characteristics of the global scenario that we have out there, Yuan, is that the big emerging economies, I always like to make this comparison between the traditional G7, whereas if you take into account the so-called E7, the E7 by purchasing power parity comparison is already bigger than the G7. So the projects that you approve in terms of development here, they have a bigger impact because you're also talking about big territories, big populations.
Well, President Choi-ho, since you mentioned the comparison between the E7, which are the most important emerging markets, and also the fastest growing emerging markets. So how do you see the role of these countries, especially the BRICS, in the future economic landscape?
Well, I think the geoeconomic meridian of the world, the geoeconomic Greenwich of the world is indeed shifting towards big emerging economies. If you gauge the actual contribution that these countries have towards the formation of global demand and global growth, it is indeed robust. I think the most important contributions to global expansion, economically speaking, will continue to be from emerging markets. And look at a tough year like 2022, where there is a lot of talk about recession, likely recession in Europe and in the United States. The emerging markets, the big emerging economies will still see growth that can be considered as robust. And I think this signals very clearly towards the future of where the, once again, geoeconomic meridian will be going by. And I think this also shows how the new development bank, an institution that is positioning itself to become the premier development bank for the emerging economies, is really in the right niche.
新兴经济体的重要代表正是金砖国家。据统计，21世纪头20年，整个新兴市场国家和发展中国家的经济总量占全球 GDP 的比重从24%提升到40%以上。作为领头羊，金砖5国如今的经济总量占世界的近1/4，人口占世界总人口的约42%，货物贸易占全球的18%，对世界经济增长贡献率高达50%。2021年，金砖5国实现7.6%的经济增速，远高于5.5%的世界平均水平。可以说，金砖国家是名副其实引领世界经济增长的最主要动力源。2022年6月23日，以构建高质量伙伴关系，共创全球发展新时代为主题的金砖国家领导人第14次会晤成功举行。再次担任金砖国家主席国的中国，全年将主办170多场各领域金砖活动。众多金砖加活动吸引了50多个非金砖国家的参与，充分展现出这个合作机制的强大磁力。
How do you see the role of China in promoting and enhancing BRICS cooperation?
It's a very important one. I mean, when the concept of BRICS first came about in the early 2000s, China was only about, 1/8 the economic size that it features today. China has become the world's number 2 economy in terms of nominal GDP. Many of the BRICS countries have in China its most important trading partner. Look at my case, Brazil. I mean, 20 years ago, bilateral trade between Brazil and China was $1 billion a year. Now it is $1 billion every 60 hours. So the exchanges have been truly amazing. And the BRICS grouping covers much more than the economy and trade. I mean, the numbers of meetings that you have involving ministers of the environment, ministers of, for example, health, science and technology shows that the dialogue involving these big emerging economies can be really transformative. Thanks to the BRICS dynamics, these leaders, who are very important for the future of the world, for the future of mankind, they meet 3 or 4 times a year. And I think this proximity, this capacity to promote dialogue on a regular basis is a key contribution to global cooperation. So the role of China in BRICS is a very central one.
During the 14th BRICS Summit, Chinese President Xi Jinping quoted a Chinese phrase in his speech, which goes, "True gold can stand the test of fire." How do you interpret such a Chinese phrase, and also how do you evaluate the BRICS cooperation mechanism since its inception?
Well, the BRICS countries, if you look at from a certain perspective, they are very different. They have different civilizational backgrounds. They have cultural experiences. They sometimes even adopt different political systems. There are economies of different scales. But where the commonalities exist, for example, having a bigger and bigger voice and participation in global governance, boosting investment in infrastructure, joining forces to promote sustainable development, bridge the gap, bridge the deficit of global cooperation, is truly a great contribution, because we are here talking about a grouping that represents more than 40% of the world's population. It will only grow in size, it will only grow in relevance. So once again, this partnership will stand the test of time.
习近平主席指出，金砖国家不是封闭的俱乐部，也不是排外的小圈子。2021年，新开发银行成功完成首批扩员，孟加拉国、阿联酋、乌拉圭和埃及4个新成员国加入。伊朗、阿根廷、沙特、埃及和土耳其等国家也纷纷表达了加入金砖国家的积极意愿。
Para Argentina representa una gran oportunidad, no solo por una cuestión.
For Argentina, it is a real opportunity.
أن هناك رؤية مصرية لدول البريكس وأهمية هذه الدول وأيضا
金砖合作机制一直是发展中国家探索自身发展方式，把改革纳入现有全球秩序的重要平台。10多年来，在大国博弈、经济复苏、新冠疫情等内外部压力并存的情况下，它穿越风风雨雨，正在用不凡的成就和超强的吸引力证明，寻求发展机会，重塑世界秩序是很多发展中国家的共同愿景。
But there are some doubts and criticisms saying, the BRICS are collapsing, they are fading. How would you respond to voices like this?
The entire set of, groupings and institutions are out there that are present in international relations are object of criticism. But let's look at BRICS. So BRICS started out as a concept for how the future of the global economy would look like, but now it has evolved to really a tool that promotes global governance. It has been also a grouping that come up with institution of its own, like the new development bank. So yes, there's probably a lot of room for improvement, and there always is. But I think the achievements of the group have indeed been remarkable, and we should not be let down by criticism. We should build on the commonalities, we should build on the common interests, and I'm sure this is going to be the case for the BRICS grouping.
The future could be, the outlook could be bright, but now the world is still faced with so many challenges. And many say that now we're not only suffering from the COVID-19 pandemic, but also the pandemic of deglobalization. So, President Choi-ho, in your opinion, how can the BRICS countries enhance stability and prosperity of regional economy through multilateral cooperation?
World is still living the negative effects of COVID. 2020 was seen as the year of the Great Intermission. Some people like to compare it to 1929, and with the dire prospects of a lost decade with global depression. And as we know, there's an increase in inflation in many countries across the globe. But I think none of these are the biggest story out there. The biggest story is indeed the fact that big emerging economies are taking a bigger and bigger slice of the global GDP pie. Their trade relations, their investment flows, I think, are a very good example of how that world is changing.
Well, President Choi-ho, you once served multiple roles at the Brazilian government, and in 2019, as the main negotiator, you facilitated the signing of a large-scale trade agreement between the Southern Common Market and the European Union. And we all know this negotiation was really a tough journey, which lasted for about 20 years and came to conclusion finally after overcoming so many difficulties and setbacks. So now you work as the head of a multilateral financial institutions. How do you think that member countries with different economic conditions, cultural backgrounds, and social development, as you mentioned before, can better seek common ground and mutual benefits?
I think, Yuan, that the lessons of history are clear. If you look at every single economic miracle after World War II, so Germany, Japan, China since 1978, they all have, in spite of their civilizational and cultural differences, one characteristic in common. These countries have boosted their economic performance through global trade, through global investment. So insofar as institutions like the New Development Bank are a key actor in that regard, so far as multilateralism is seen as the most important method for not only solving problems, but also for promoting global cooperation, I think we're going to be traveling along the right track.
2021年9月28日，致力于多边主义和全球合作的新开发银行迎来了一个重要的日子。位于上海浦东新区世博园区的新开发银行总部大楼正式交接。特罗约行长说，作为第一个总部落户上海的国际多边金融机构，他们终于有了自己的家。未来，这家国际多边金融机构将进一步扎根中国，见证中国改革开放的大门越开越大。
Well, President Choi-ho, now you're being working and living in China for a couple of years, especially after you move into that state-of-the-art building. How's your life here in China? And we Chinese people, we like to talk about a phrase called the Chinese dream. Do you have a dream that's relevant with China?
Well, it's really a pleasure to work and live in Shanghai. It's one of the most dynamic cities of the world. And the headquarters of NDB being in Shanghai really constitute a symbol not only for the city, and this is something that I always like to say. Right. When you think of Geneva, for example, you think of the Palace of the Nations. When you think of New York, you think about the United Nations building on First Avenue. So more and more in the future, when we think of Shanghai, we want people to think of the New Development Bank and how that created, the seeds and the necessary conditions for emerging economies to be even more prosperous.
Well, President Choi-ho, it was such a pleasure talking to you, and thank you so much for sharing with us your very insightful views.
I thank you for the opportunity. Thank you so much for your work, and I'm looking forward to meeting you in Beijing in person.
Okay, look forward to that. Again, thank you. Gracias. 历史的长河时而风平浪静，时而波涛汹涌，但是最终它总是会奔涌向前。新开发银行的故事告诉我们，金砖这一艘大船正在乘风破浪，向着构建人类命运共同体的目标勇毅前行。而中国将一如既往同包括金砖国家在内的世界各国一道携手合作，走出一条相互砥砺、合作共赢的全球治理大道。 好的，感谢您收看本期的高端访谈，我是邹韵，我们。